Welcome to the Anklers Art and Crafts Podcast, presenting conversations about the careers and contributions of the talented artisans who work behind the scenes on the TV series and movies we love. I'm Christopher Rosen, Deputy Editor at Ankler Media, and I'm so happy to bring you my recent conversation with the team behind Disney Plus's Emmy-nominated drama series, Andor. Writer Dan Gilroy, a nominee this year in Outstanding Writing for a Drama Series for the episode Welcome to the Rebellion. Giannis Metz, a nominee this year in the Outstanding Directing for a Drama Series category for the episode Who Are You? And costume designer Michael Wilkinson, a nominee this year for Outstanding Fantasy Sci-Fi Costumes for the episode Harvest. Listen to our conversation right now. This episode is sponsored by Disney Plus. For Giannis, I guess I'll start with you, because I know you directed, obviously, 8, which is the Gore Massacre itself. I guess when you went into those 3 episodes, and then knowing that the Gore Massacre was going to be such a focal point of the season and those 3 episodes, and I guess, how did you kind of, work your way into that and approach, not just that episode, and then also building out the arc of those 3 episodes as the director?
Right. Well, it was a very intense and time-consuming prep in terms of getting the Gorman Massacre right. As I remember it took up, at least 50% of what we did in prep, just trying to understand the logistics of that situation. It was going to be huge, and one of the first things that happened when I came to London and came to Pinewood Studios where we were going to film it was that myself, my DOP Mark Patton, and my first AD Sean Guest walked over and to look at the location because they'd started building the plaza on the back lot, and we just realized how big that build was going to be, and that we were going to create an illusion there of thousands of people being essentially massacred in that place, and trying to figure out, okay, what do we have? How many extras? How can we do this? How can we construct our shots? And sitting down, watching, talking about films that inspired us, talking about Battle of Algiers, talking about this French film called Athena, talking about football riots, street fights on the Gaza Strip, collecting all sorts of inspirational material and just trying to map out, where is everyone at any given time? How do we make this as claustrophobic and tense as we can without losing sight of the overall sort of geography of the space? So it was, I think it was, just taking one step at a time to climb a huge mountain that, Dan wrote it. We were like, thank you.
So Dan,
to be honest, it was very exciting.
Go ahead.
I played a part. I definitely played a part. That's no question.
Well, for Dan, I want to ask you about writing. You have those 3 episodes, obviously, and obviously you're nominated for Welcome to the Rebellion, which is 9, but in 8, which is Who Are You? I guess one of the things I love about the episode too is you're able, the way the episode, you really so much is happening, like Jonas was saying, with the action, but you're really able to follow the characters and stuff. I guess, how did you kind of prioritize making sure that the character arcs in that episode were not being lost amid the spectacle that was happening before we get to Welcome to the Rebellion, which also has incredible stuff, obviously, that you wrote and were nominated for?
Well, I think Tony and I come from the same place. We write together, and we certainly come from the same source in terms of how we approach it. And we are character-based writers. We are character-based writers who track the emotion and human decisions that people make. And we believe that if you follow those, that will lead you to your story. So the concept always was coming from Tony, in which I embraced certainly, and Bo embraced, the other writer in season 1, and Tom Bissell in season 2, was that the whole show is really about radicalization. So when you look at the show as about radicalization, and what does resistance mean? And what really starts people down this path? A lot of questions come. How does this build? What are the costs? And when that is your priority, Gorman takes on a very specific power to it, which is, it is the fulcrum of the entire second season. And in many ways, It's the climax of both seasons because it is the most polarizing, radicalizing event that happens in the entire show. So what we were approaching it from is both sides are using this event for their own purposes. Krennic is obviously using it in a fascistic way to create a narrative in which the fear and the danger of radicals / anarchists needs to be cost and stamped out at any cost, needs to be destroyed. Luthen understands that when you have 95% of the universe, of the sentient beings in the universe, who are not committed in any way to the struggle that's going on, they've decided for whatever reason that they're going to live with it and go along with it. Luthen realizes that he needs an event in which a line is crossed that's so egregious and so undemocratic and so morally wrong on its surface that people will be called to arms. So when you approach the season like that, and certainly when you approach 208 like that, a lot of things fall into place. Because now what you're doing is you're tracking people who are on one side or the other of that battle. And it becomes not an easy task, but it becomes a very clear task that you are following people on two sides of a moral issue. And their choices are literally what is driving all of the plot of 208. And that's how we approached it.
And then you get to 209 and you obviously have the Mon Mothma speech, which is also like, all of these things are such iconic canon moments, I feel like, for Star Wars, obviously. So I guess like using what you just said there, like how did you kind of approach that speech and knowing how big of a moment, like this is a fulcrum, the whole, like it's hard. It's like every one of these episodes is so huge in this season, obviously, but like, man, these, like this group here is so incredible. And then into 209 to get that speech for what it means for the season, for that character. Like, can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. So first of all, the show operates as the show, and then nothing operates in a vacuum. The show is operating in a world that we're living in as we're watching the show. And it's not all the time that there's an intersection and a resonance between the two, but there's a very strong resonance between what 209 is about and what 208 builds into 209 and what we are living through right now. So some context is needed. In the Star Wars universe, the Galactic Senate had a very long history as a governing body that was built on democratic principles. So through the 5 years of Andor, which we've condensed into 2 years, we're watching many things, but we're watching the destruction and obliteration of democratic principles. In the Senate, the Senate is descending. We're watching it through Mon's eyes over her shoulder. The Senate is descending into a total capitulation of the Emperor's rule. So what Mon has witnessed going to 209 through the 5 years of our show, 4 years, I guess, because there's still 1 year to go, and certainly prior to our show, what Mon has witnessed is her Senate colleagues are completely abandoning all their democratic beliefs out of cowardice and expediency, let's say, and fear. So the speech that she's giving here, it has two audiences. The first group are the elected officials who've completely run away and abandoned everything they believed in and left the people who voted for them, at the mercy of evil. And the second group she's speaking to are all the inhabitants of the universe who, similar to Luthen has staged this event, or certainly encouraged this event, because he wants people to be hit and decide which side am I on. What Mon is doing is picking up the other side of that argument. If you have now awoken to what's going on by what's going on in Gorman, this is what I say. I say that when the chasm between what you know is true and what you're told becomes unbearable, it is time to act. When truth is no longer truth, it is time to act. So her speech has an epic quality to it that was almost reverential for me, because these are issues that I take to heart, because I believe we are living in times that are parallel and resonant to the times that she finds herself in and Cassian finds himself in. So those were the drivers of it.
I want to talk. I want to ask Michael about the costumes. I will come back to that because I do want to hear a little about that. And doing a show where you're echoing so many real world things within the Star Wars universe and being able to do that. But for Michael, I guess also just picking off what Dan was saying there, in terms of like making the costume, like obviously like so much. Like you're nominated for the Harvest episode, which is episode 3, which has an incredible wedding. The Gorham stuff obviously is also incredible. But I guess just for you and a lot of stuff with Genevieve O'Reilly, who plays Mom Mothma. I guess like how did you kind of approach? Or how do you approach the costumes, ensuring that the character arc is being tracked in the costumes? I guess, like, do you think, like, how did you kind of approach that here in season 2 for you?
Well, I'm sure you can hear listening to Dan and Giannis that, you know, the way we approached our storytelling is extremely seriously and a very kind of complex, realistic way. You know, this is no sort of space opera, you know, straight out action series. We're treating these stories very important, very relevant to today. So that means when I'm designing costumes, the characters have to feel extremely realistic and believable, and there's nothing that's just ornamental or looks cool or is Star Warsy. You know, everything is there for a reason, whether it's the cast members or the background. So when it comes to a planet like Gorman, which we haven't really seen before in any corners of the Star Wars storytelling universe. It's a case of really building a whole culture from the ground up. So I thought a lot about what we want the Gormans to portray in our series, and what that is everything great about humans that it would be a tragedy to crush. And so we created the Gormans as a very strong community with a strong sense of traditions. Their clothing is very traditional and sober and elegant. They produce beautiful fabrics and materials on this planet that they're very proud of. They dress in a very in a kind of formal way. We were sort of inspired by, the 40s and 50s of Europe and Paris and Italy, and we looked into those sorts of cultures for a lot of our cues. But yeah, we created about 500 extras that were in the Gorman Plaza, and that was everything from citizens, hotel owners, coffee shop owners, people from other planets that were coming to deal with fabrics and trade on Gorman. So there's just so many levels of detail that go into building all of these costumes. So that was one thing that was very important to us, to show the people as very detailed, layered characters and human beings. When it comes to things like Cassian, he has lots of different personas that he adopts when he goes from these different missions for the Alliance. So in this episode, he is posing as a reporter. So he had to kind of have this sort of field reporter feel to him. Cyril goes on his own amazing costume journey in Gorman, where we wanted to show that he is touched and affected by this amazing culture that he comes in contact with in Gorman, and he starts dressing in a much more kind of elegant, sophisticated, expressive human way compared to the sort of more office core way that he dressed on Coruscant. So subtle things like that, where you sort of show the effects of a culture on a person. You build up this wonderful culture of Gorman as something that's so noble and human. And then so when the Imperial might comes and crushes it, it really reinforces the tragedy and the horror of this situation. So yeah, that's an example, I guess, of how I like to use costumes to help illuminate the themes of our writers and the director.
Nice. And Janusz, I mean, for you, like you were saying before, like you're kind of like mentioning like Battle of Algiers. I know, like I've seen other interviews you talked about like your own Armadillo, right? Your own documentary about like Danish soldiers and stuff. I guess like not necessarily were you surprised, because obviously this is your first season with the show, but there was a first season. But I guess like getting to use Star Wars as a platform when it's like such a recognizable thing that you kind of like every age knows about Star Wars, and so you could use this as a platform to kind of, I don't want to say like echo like history. You could, I mean, I guess, I don't know, like you could use it to tell, to teach people about like real world, use it to like express like real world issues. I find like really fascinating and like a great use of the franchise and a great use of this kind of platform. And I guess like, was that something that really spoke to you before you even came onto this show?
Honestly, it's one of the reasons I came on board. It was one of in my interview with Tony, where we talked, when I was being considered as a director. One of the things that Tony said was, look, we're really trying to use the franchise to talk about real issues, to talk about politics, to make it feel grounded in character. So that really drew me in. And this whole sort of, I think we can safely say, kind of reinvention of the franchise was very, very exciting. I'd been a long fan of Tony's and also of Dan's work so being entrusted with their scripts in that regard was just a wonderful opportunity for me. And, you're pointing to something that was very relevant for my work, which was my own experience of shooting documentaries in a war zone, or shooting a documentary in a war zone. I went to Helmand, Afghanistan back in 2009. I deployed with a combat unit of Danish soldiers, and I experienced firsthand what it means to be in real combat and what it feels like. And I tried to capture that in a documentary film, and that was hugely informative to the way that we shot the Gorman massacre. We wanted, to really make those feelings of, fear and claustrophobia and horror and sort of the loss that inherently goes into it. We wanted to make that palpable to audiences. So I also feel it was the people that came together for this show, when Dan talks about being a character-driven writer and writing for character, I'm all about, the characters and the actors and making it feel real from their perspective when I direct. And, the way Michael's costumes feeds into that, and how he talks about, making sure that, whatever the characters go through is reflected in their costumes. I think we were a group of people that really came together with the same sensibilities about, what good filmmaking is. And I think that was part of the joy of working there and part of the excitement. Coming on board Andor, you felt you were stepping into a world where everyone was really, working from a feeling that we were doing something extraordinary. And that was very much part of the atmosphere on set. I think we all felt that this was going to be something extraordinary.
For Dan, for you, obviously you worked, you're Tony's brother, obviously, but you've also worked with him a lot. And I guess like you also worked on season 1. Coming into season 2, the stakes obviously then are incredibly high, not just for the storytelling, but for the show, because season 1 was also incredibly acclaimed. But I think you guys did level up for season 2. And I guess like, how did you kind of approach that? And in terms of the pressure too, maybe, or is that the right word? I guess, would you use pressure to like, match or exceed what you did in the first season? And how'd you guys kind of do that together?
I think anytime, even if you're making a one-off, first, second, third act, you're always trying to build. That's the point of almost every work, I think. There's the climax of some sort. So certainly we always imagined that every season had a climax, and certainly the show would have a climax as well. And when it was identified that 2 years was going to be our time frame and it was going to be compressed, 5 years into 2, you're definitely looking at it like we're not, and we're going to climax. So there's, in a lot of shows, climax means, spectacle and throwing a lot of money on the screen and looking for things to break and crash. That was not our climax. Our climax is a moral, character-driven climax. And in many ways, it's driven by Rogue One, because this is a very unique project. You know what's going to happen to these people at the end when this is all said and done. Most of them are going to die, which is a very unusual starting place. However, it gives you a tremendous power as you're building through or barreling toward your climax. Because when you know that these people are fighting a moral battle, and they are, in their minds, and certainly probably even objectively, they're not going to live to see the victory. So what are you paralleling? What are you echoing? You're echoing, one of the greatest speeches of all time. And I'm not talking about Mon's speech. I'm saying what's involved in Martin Luther King's Lincoln Memorial speech. I have a dream. I may not live to see this. When somebody says that and they're fighting for something that a large portion of people who are watching the show hopefully believe in, you have a natural engine that's built into your show. You are watching selfless acts of bravery on an individual and group basis. So there is, and a show that's character driven, we have what I always consider to be narrative gold, because I believe there are things worth dying for. I know it moves me greatly. Many things worth dying for. Some people don't. I do. And when I watch something in which I'm watching characters sacrifice themselves for a greater good, almost like acolytes, it's almost a religion. My human frailty and my desire to live has now been superseded by something bigger than me. So when I have that as a beacon and I'm aiming for that, I'm on fire. And I think Tony and Bo and certainly Tom, we all say that. You are on hallowed entertainment ground. You're on like the greatest engine you can do. I mean, my favorite films probably in some way, many of them encompass that concept. So it was not an easy task, but it was an inspiring task to get up every day that we were writing the second season, knowing this is where we were going. And it made it a very memorable time.
When you see the response from obviously fans of the show, but fans of like Star Wars franchise, like Giannis was saying there, like I think it is like Andor is considered like a reinvigoration of the Star Wars franchise, and maybe had in other mediums or other not as successful recently as Andor has been. I guess, is that like, do you feel heartened by that, knowing that like the fans or that people have really responded so well to the show?
Well, yeah, I mean that's its own separate. That's connected, but it's a separate thing, and I take great pleasure in that. And this is large measure Tony, because what Tony did at the beginning of the beginning, he decided this was going to be recontextualization of IP that's been around for 40 years. And what does he decide to do? He's going to say, I'm going to show you what it's really like to live in this universe. I'm going to show you to some degree what it's like to fly around and go warp speed and everything else and all that other stuff. But I'm going to show you what it's like to live in this universe. I'm going to ground this. And I think what a lot of fans found was that was breathtaking, because they'd been living in a world for 40 years. It's almost like, I imagine everybody on this call has been on a movie set. So the first time you walk into a movie set, you go, God, it looks so real. It's always fascinating when you go around the scrim and you go, oh my God, it's like, it's a piece of paper and there's nothing behind it. So I think a lot of Star Wars fans were walking around sets of Star Wars for 40 years that were used very effectively for what they were trying to do. But I think what this was about was like having a wind come through and blowing the sets down and going, here's what it was like. This is what it was like. And it turns out it's really interesting. And I think that was something that is a big, big element in underlying everything that was done.
For you, Michael, I think that it kind of goes with the costumes too, right? Everything's very tactile. It feels like this is all. So I guess, like, how did you kind of approach that to make it feel like real as you do in this show?
Yeah, I think we tried to bring us the similar amount of complexity and layering to the costumes that are in the writing and the concepts of these episodes. And so I think we really treated each character as a human being, not as an icon or an archetype, but as a flawed human being. That they have their good days and their bad days, like all of us. And why do they dress the way they do? Why does Mon use her clothes as armor that sort of protects her and shields her true self from the world? I feel like all of the characters in this show kind of use clothes in a different way, often to disguise their true nature. Whether you're Luthen Rael, who is, working behind the scenes to start up the Rebel Alliance, but posing as a very trustworthy and urbane gallery owner on Coruscant. or our new character Clea, who also has like a double life and appears in so many different contexts and disguises herself as chameleon-like. They all have this really interesting relationship to their clothing, and so I thought long and hard about all of that, and I tried to establish literal sort of closets for each character. So it was kind of like, for example, with Genevieve's clothing when she's on Coruscant in the Senate, she has kind of mix and match pieces, skirts and tops and tunics and layers that she can wear in different ways, just like a human being does, not just like, here's your costume and it looks like this and it looks like the costume illustration. It was a very organic kind of approach to putting clothing together. And I think that's sort of part of the secret to it feeling really as realistic as possible. And also using clothing perhaps to like help tell the story. For example, when in episode 9, when she gives the great speech in the Senate, Mon Mothma, and then Cassian is tasked to then extract her out of the Senate and help her escape. He takes his sort of cool overcoat off and puts it over her shoulders. She sort of starts shedding literally like the finery of being a senator on this Washington-style planet, and she's becoming, she's stripping her persona and showing her true self. She's becoming a member of the Rebel Alliance by sort of putting this coat on. And so you have these kind of images throughout that help tell the story with the clothing. And I love that moment when she's in the safe house and she's wearing the trench coat and starting to look like a kind of badass, member of the Rebel Alliance. And Cassian says, well, welcome to the rebellion. Here you are. So yeah, I think I had this extraordinary gift of the writing that sort of gave me so many wonderful clues into solving the visuals of this season. But then I had my incredible team of sort of 90 full-time costumers that helped me create this whole world. We created, I think, over 3,000 costumes for the crowd from the 9 different planets that we went to. We had 700 principal costumes made from scratch. We had incredible tailors and textile artists and armor makers and, crowd teams putting this all together. And it was just an extraordinary creative process. I spent maybe about 5 years of my life between season 1 and season 2, creating about almost 20 hours of storytelling in the Star Wars universe between the 2 seasons. So it was just this constant stream of costumes that were required that we built from scratch. So it was wonderful, creative project to try and show these wonderful arcs over of the different characters. They all ended up in a very different place to where they started, and using the costumes to help show that journey with such incredible characters was, it was the experience of a lifetime, I think, for a costume designer.
It's really cool. I know we have to wrap up, but you mentioned something. You were saying like when the Welcome to Rebellion, which is the title of the 9th episode. It also reminded me of 8, which is Who Are You? And Giannis and Dan, I want to ask you about that. The scene when Cyril confronts Cassian and then is shot. I just found that whole sequence, I think, is just incredible. I think the writing is incredible. I think the performance is incredible. The direction. Can you talk a little about like getting like that moment in episode 8 for those characters and kind of like, just, I don't know, Janusz, how you like directing like Kyle and so I just think that like I think that scene is so great, and I guess I'd love to hear you talk a little about it.
Yeah, I mean throughout season 2, but particularly coming to the crux of 7 and into 8, and how Cyril's, the veil is sort of lifted from Cyril's eyes, and he sees the truth of what he's been part of, and he starts to understand. The sort of the false narrative that was created around Gorman was such an interesting arc, and journey for him to be in. I mean, from a directorial point of view, there was the scenes across from Dedra who was, that were instrumental in terms of, confrontation with this, the woman that he loved and the one that kind of, kept the lies going around him, and it was in the sort of, the deepest intimate sphere of your life. It's across from your lover. And then seeing the breakup between the two and seeing how he's now walking out of there completely disillusioned and at the same time with a new, beginning to come to grasp with a new sense of enlightenment, and then meeting Cassian, the person that he's been chasing ever since the first episode of season 1 was a huge moment. And it never, it's this whole rage that's unfolded in him and unleashed in him. And Dan could probably talk much better about the writing of that. What it was for me also from a directorial point of view, getting into that fight and on a very small scale level, how does Cassian and Cyril have a fight with each other? He's a warrior and Cyril is essentially an office clerk, but he's got so much anger. He's got so much frustration. He's got so much rage. There's almost like a squirrel with rabies or something trying to, attacking you. And it created a very interesting dynamic of the fight. And then obviously one of the big moments of the line, that Cassian says, "Who are you?" to Cyril just before he's killed was, I can reveal that we shot several endings for that scene because we weren't 100% sure how it's going to end up. Is it going to hold up that there's no recognition and that he only says that, and he says that at the very end. So we covered our bases a little bit, but I think it was really, the genius of the writing. This is such a tragical moment. And I think that line in particular speaks about it's the existential question that all the characters in our show have to ask themselves. Who are you? What do you believe in? What are you willing to die for? As Dan, said earlier. And it somehow, also reaches out to an audience. It's the question we all have to ask ourselves. Who are you? Who are you? And I think that was a beautiful moment, I think, for and certainly one of the bigger moments of the season, I think.
Yeah, Dan, do you want to talk a little about that? I'd love
that.
to.
That is exactly right. That is, I couldn't have put that any better. That question, the title of that show is so interesting because it certainly applies to Cyril. Who are you? Literally, I've seen you, or I've experienced, I don't know who the hell you are. You just almost killed me. You're about to kill me. And the other question, as Jonas pointed out, is it's really directed at everybody else. Who are you? Who are you? Because as he just said, what is the show about? Ultimately, it's about radicalization. And it's on both sides. You are either going to be a part of the resistance or you're not. And if you're not, in the cases in our show, the everyday people who decide not to be, they actively in some way or another become part of the other side. They become bureaucrats. They become politicos. They're part of it. They make whatever rationalizations they can to decide they want to be a part of it, and they're a part of it. So the question is exactly that. Who are you? What do you believe in? What are you going to do? And why is it important? Because the whole show happens behind a flare. There's a flare in the background, and it is this bonfire of fascism. It's this complete bonfire of fascism that's not only burning everything it has, it's encroaching, it's coming closer and closer. So you better decide who are you? What side do you stand on? Now, it's very interesting that the moment the question is asked, Cyril starts to lower the gun. And I know there's people out there who believe it didn't mean anything. He was a part of the empire. It didn't change. I never looked at it that way. I looked at Cyril. So his Dedra is a believer in the empire. She's gone. She's going to do whatever they ask her to do. She's a jewel because of her childhood. But Cyril is not a part of what's going on because of a belief. He's needy. Edie never gave him what he needed. His father wasn't around. He needed a pat on the head. When Partygaz says this, great job, he goes, that's the best day of my life. He's needy. So when he's encountering Rylance on the square, and now it's suddenly revealed to him what's really going on, he has no belief or sort of craven soul to fall back on. It's been revealed to him now. And I was always thinking it was similar to a great scene that I love in a really wonderful film. On Bridge on the River Kwai, Alec Guinness, a British officer, becomes obsessed for personal needy reasons in building the bridge. And it's only in the last seconds when he's confronted with true British soldiers trying to destroy it that he goes, my God, what have I done? And I always imagined that Cyril was experiencing an epiphany of that sort when confronted with that question, and also certainly on the basis of what Rylance has told him. He's waking up. And you know what? It's kind of a cruel irony that it's happening right before he dies, but an epiphany is epiphany. And it's a gift in a way.
Yeah, I could talk about this show with you guys for a long time, but we do have to wrap up. I want to thank Emmy nominee Dan Gilroy for drama writing, Emmy nominee Janos Metz for drama directing, and Emmy nominee Michael Wilkinson for outstanding fantasy sci-fi costumes, all for Andor. Thank you all so much for doing this. It was really great chatting with you about this show.
Thank
you. I appreciate it
so much.